Hey everyone, welcome back to another VC Deck Breakdown hosted by Cremorne Digital Hub. I'm Darren, the Community and Memberships Coordinator here at Cremorne Digital Hub. For those of you joining us for the first time, Cremorne Digital Hub is a space located in Melbourne, Victoria, where we connect the industry with innovation. We do that by running a lot of events in person, online, through our community and our clubhouse. That's for founders. This is the VC Deck Breakdown, part of our Lunch and Learn series where we get an unfiltered first impression of a VC on some pitch decks, get some advice, get talking about what exactly it is in the pitch deck that makes a pitch deck stand out, and what it could need work on. Today we're really happy to have Hugh Stephens joining us again from Galileo Ventures.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us, Hugh. Thanks for
Delight as always.
Yes. So today we have two pitch decks to be broken down. We do have some time for some Q&A from the actual founders themselves after each breakdown. And then if we do have time at the end as well, we will do some open Q&A with the audience. So please leave your questions for afterwards, or just flag them as a question in the chat and we'll get to them by the end of the session, okay? Let me just open up the pitch decks and we'll get started. And just for your reminder again, both you and I have not been through these pitch decks.
I haven't seen them yet. So you can open the pitch decks and I'll do the background. So
Sure. Go ahead.
So the structure of these, so I run a pre-seed fund, Galileo Ventures, and we like to invest really early, invested pre-incorporation really in some companies. And so we obviously see a lot of decks. And one of the things that I think I've realized, I guess, coming into the space as a VC, I was an operator beforehand, so I ran a SaaS company. And one of the things we realize is people don't often sort of like really understand what it sort of looks like. It's a bit like when you first hire someone, and when you first hire someone, I always say like you don't really know how to write a cover letter until you've hired someone and you've had to do resume screening, and then you sort of understand how to write a resume or a cover letter really well. Because I think it's the same sort of thing of when you see lots and lots and lots, you sort of get a much better pattern recognition. And you also get a better understanding of what the other person's going to actually see as they're reading through it. So the idea of this is to try and kind of brain dump a little bit of what goes through my mind. You'll see me talk about some of my own perhaps biases and things like that as I go through, which is the intent. But I guess core to the thing is, firstly, thanks to the founders for submitting their pitch decks. It is, like it's a bit of a scary thing, I guess, to have these things done in public, broken down. But thank you very much to them. And the aim of this is to try and be as constructive as possible. So we'll see what we get.
Let me actually...
It's got the joys of technology here.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love. All right. Okay, cool. Great.
Sweet.
Cool. So we're starting with our very first deck, Thrive PX, formerly My Appointments.
Thrive Practice, I'm guessing. We're going healthcare style here. Probably Darren doesn't know that one. Okay, allied health. Okay, so now, again, part that wasn't in my introduction, so I spent some time in healthcare, so I understand allied health relatively well, but, the medical side of allied than otherwise. So, 10 hours a week. Okay, so my first thing when I look at this is I go, okay, this is another PMS, another practice management system. So it's the first thing I look and I go, okay, there are lots, let's see what the actual sort of like niche is, what's different. I like the people who've seen this before. I like the summary on the right-hand side here of just showing what it is that we do from the start. Product screenshot, also always nice. And when I look slightly closer, I'm going to lean over the shoulder here. We have actual revenue, so sweet. 400 active users, 100K in rev. So that works out to be what, $25 per user per year, roughly. If my math is right in my head. And organic growth. All startups really early have organic growth, so that doesn't really make it much of a difference to me. But anyway, let's go on. I'm guessing this is going to be a problem slide. Okay, so skill distributable profit clinics. True. One of the things I always say is that the irony in healthcare is they become small businesses, but they never actually get trained to run small businesses, whether it's HR or otherwise. True. So hours per week. So this is kind of one of those things where I'm like, I know this problem directionally, but that's mostly probably because of my background. So it's not too bad. I think the thing that probably this misses a little bit of like is that piece of like the way I describe this a lot of the time is that the efficiency savings, and you look at a lot of the sort of medical note-taking solutions and things like that, the real benefit for them is less the time saved and more just the piece of like, if you talk to, for example, like you talk to a surgeon and you say like, what's the least favourite part of your job? They're like, clinic. They hate clinic, right? Because they're a surgeon because they want to cut things. Yeah. And so like the customer-facing way to talk about this is less them as a business owner and more about them as the piece of they're in this profession because they want to deliver service to patients. And I think that's the part that probably I'd sort of restructure this maybe a little bit. It depends on who you're sort of really looking at here. Like, is it the practice owner versus the clinician and things like that, which can be a little bit different, again, the lens. But that sort of is probably a bit of a niche one. But yeah, simple enough problem slide.
Sure.
Okay, so second one. Now, so far, none of this has really said to me yet why this is different to the other practice management. I'm still assuming this is a practice management system. Nothing really here has said why this is different. And I haven't really gotten a piece here of like, what are we doing that is like totally different to the market? Like, why have we got these first 400 customers? Like, what is it about it that you've really changed? And this slide, I think, and you can see how quickly I'm reading this because I'm reading it as I'm going. Like, this slide does the same thing. Like, all of these things are things that you could say about almost any solution. And like, one of my easy tests to have is like, you take your logo off and you put a competitor's logo on, and is the slide still true? Well, you're probably not really doing a good job of communicating why you're different. And this kind of solution slide, I think, where you're just sort of saying software makes business better, is one of those kind of like, at a very simple level, yeah, of course software makes business go better. Otherwise, we're all in a pretty bad place if we're all building software. But secondly, why is your software the one that's better?
Yeah.
So we may find that out in the next slide. Okay, so now a traction slide. So we still haven't really come back to this piece of like where we are. So traction does say in that element of someone here is buying something for a good reason, right? And this is where like sort of the first question I'd ask. So we've got freemium, which is interesting. And we're doing rev via commissions, same as the Halaxy model. Who's, I'm sure the founder probably knows what a Halaxy is, but similar space. And like the traction piece says someone is buying this for some reason. And I guess the first question I'd be asking the founder is like, where are they coming from? Like, is it they're coming from an alternative solution? Are they coming from being a graduate, which is when they're first buying something and they'll sort of use the first thing they almost hear of, for want of a better description? Are they coming from Excel spreadsheets or index cards? You know, obviously different journey compared to saying, you know, they were paying X dollars and then now they found this and now they're paying Y dollars and here's why. So I really like traction. Traction solves all problems. That's why VCs like traction. But I guess the part that this doesn't really tell me is that piece of sort of, again, we're still coming back to the piece of why, is I think a really important piece to think about.
Do you feel like for things like practice management software that seems to be relatively common, that it's important early on to make clear why you're different?
100%. So I think the more common, like when it's a space, you know, like I think the last time we spoke about spatiotemporal, which was
deep
sort
tech.
of looking at, which is deep tech, you could call it, you know, like AI world models, spatiotemporal, you know, like, and you got to think about time series modeling and how that means, and you know, and I'm like, oh, it's very fascinating. Yeah. You know, like some of that stuff, you definitely get much more easily lost in the sort of like, what exactly is this?
Sure.
Whereas when you say to me, oh yeah, we're building a better practice management system, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what makes it better?
Yeah, right.
You know, like, why is this different? You know, like I can understand what a practice, you know, sort of like saying like, oh, we're going to do, when Shopify came out, right? It was like, we're going to do e-commerce, but good.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, cool. Like, I get that. Yeah. What you're trying to do. You know, like, why is it good? You know, tell me about why it's good. And so I think that's where you definitely need to spend more time of that, because beyond anything else, like, particularly if you deal with a VC that's had a longer sort of time horizon. So, you know, I was speaking to a team yesterday, who were in sort of like, so I guess I'll call it like property management space. And that's the same sort of space in that in property management, everyone's probably had an investment at some point touching property management. And they absolutely, generally speaking, will have burned their money on property management and they will hate it.
Sorry.
People actually hear us?
Yeah, we had one person say that they can...
Oh, someone's laughing face emoji. I'll take that as a yes.
Does that mean that people can't hear us? Or can they hear us?
Chat us in. Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yes, there you go. Thumbs up emoji.
Okay, great.
Okay,
perfect.
Sweet.
Great.
Sorry, making sure it's not on orange.
Yeah. Just making sure.
Yeah, so the same thing I think with
Great.
the property
Thanks,
management
guys.
space. And ticketing is the same. You know, every VC has done a ticketing thing or like a fitness app. You know, everyone's done one.
Sure.
And so when you see another thing that's even adjacently in that space, you always start by thinking to yourself, so why exactly is this different? And that's a really important question you got to answer as a founder, because I've probably lost all my money on my fitness app or my property app or my healthcare software or my government software or, you know, all of these other typical places people love to go and build things. And there's a reason that industries have drag.
Yeah.
And you've got to persuade me why it's different now. And that's a really important thing to think about. Okay, team slide. So practitioner-led businesses, multi-practitioner clinic. Okay, so one of the things on talking about Anil is like, are you a practitioner? And it's not. I assume maybe not. I don't know. But like, I'd sort of make that clear of like, this sort of says to me the lived experience piece, but from which lens?
Sure.
And again, because I probably know the space a little bit of depth, is like, is that from a practice owner slash like sort of practice management lens, or is that from a practitioner? And like, you can be both, obviously. But that can sometimes help sort of understand where that goes. And technical, so great. We've got the classic, business founder, technical co-founder, nice, simple, easy. That makes sense. Okay, so good reviews. Now, this is one of those ones of where I think people aren't. It's tricky to say whether these sort of things are useful or not. They're important, I think, a lot of the time when you're doing customer decks, sales decks.
Right.
That's a really important aspect. But VCs and things like that often, again, like in these kind of like, I'll call them market-facing reviews,
Sure.
You often don't really get a clear insight as to why they've really bought. Like, I can see here they've said, great decision, blows them out of the water, I've used other systems, but it still doesn't really quite say that depth of why. Because, you wouldn't keep using a software product if it made your business go backwards.
Right.
So the fact that they say it was great, made our business go forward, well, you're not going to choose the review that says this was the worst software I've used in my life, for one thing, in your deck.
Yeah, sure.
But secondly, like, putting all that aside, like, I really want, like, I'm still coming out with this piece of like why, like, and what's made it different. So, and that might be pricing model, that might be functionality, that might be, I don't know, AI, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
But like, I think that's where for me as a VC in this kind of deck, I want to know that piece of like, I like the case study concept, but I want to see it in the case of like again, come back to the piece of like, where have they come from? Why did they buy? What was the sales cycle? Or like, what's the actual, the customer value? What does that look like? Is kind of the data points I really want to understand, more so than like, cool, people are happy with our software who keep paying for it. I'm like, well, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't usually keep paying for software if you hate it, although Salesforce does exist.
Yeah. Or, sometimes you just forget, or you tell yourself you're going to use it again next week or something.
Correct. Okay, so now I come a bit more into the why. Now this is a bit more interesting, because this is where I come more interesting. Okay, so this is, again, I'm summarising this off the back of like me having just skim read the headings, which is exactly what VCs do. So like, this is kind of where we start to come to the piece of like, it feels at least, what you're doing differently. So the idea, from what I understand here, so my interpretation of the slide, is the piece of saying, hey, what is missing is beyond just the booking piece, is actually the way in which it drives revenue, which is a really interesting insight, right? And like a lot of these things, like your practice management system does run billing, and a lot of them are legacy, and they're not also HubSpot. Like I can sort of see the piece of saying, hey, like there's an empty place here of saying, let's bring that world of good practice marketing automation, whatever you want to call about it, into practice management, which probably hasn't really been done substantively.
Yeah.
Like some of this, like intake forms, yes. Recalls, yes. Like I did recalls for Hot Dog when Hot Dog did recalls. Yes, follow-ups, yes. Like all these things already exist. So like those parts I'm kind of like, Whereas like clinical workflows and follow through, and how that then drives either clinical outcomes, rebookings, rev, which is the second part. And things like prepayments, packages, payment plans, interesting, again, interesting piece, But like I think, really drive for me a little bit here of what it is that is really, truly different about that, because I agree with the heading of saying admin software can't fix the growth problem, but there still is a big surface area of what admin software is. And that's where you can often get lost as a founder, where like everyone in healthcare ends up having to, either getting very close to or ends up building a practice management solution. Right, Hot Dog almost did that mistake.
Yeah.
Like I think it's an easy sort of task to fall down until you realise that actually the surface area of these things can get really big. And so for all of your intent of building something different, the hard part is there's so much stuff you've got to build just to like the table stakes functionality as you grow and scale. So like, what are kind of the key product principles that are driving you in that context? And I think the product principle of saying we want this to be how you grow is actually an interesting one. But I think this doesn't quite say to me how this is truly different to a lot of the rest of the market. And maybe I am underestimating the market. But certainly from my world of primary care, this is kind of the second one's an interesting one, sure. But like I think that piece of sort of like practices do marketing bad. What if marketing and growth/revenue was actually embedded in the processes they did in their practice management? I go, oh yeah, okay, like I can I can see why that's interesting for a practice manager or like a practice owner.
Yeah,
makes good sense.
Definitely.
Okay, task versus outcomes. Okay, this is sure. Again, like I think it's one of those things of where I go, yeah, it's an interesting question. Okay, so the third point. The third point. We're finally getting some interesting points, or at least some things that I find interesting. So, 7 of the last 10 are trialing from Clinico, which is their major competitor, right? And this is where it's like, where are they coming from? And I go, oh, okay, that's much more interesting.
Yeah, nice.
And so that's where I guess I want to understand beyond just that. I want to say why. Like, what is it they're unhappy about with the existing solution? And maybe the answer is number 2, is like, actually it's because they've found a disconnect between it and, the actual growth piece, or they've found that they've had to layer practice management on top of, I don't know, SMS portals and whatever it might be.
Sure.
But like, I think number 3 is in some ways the most valuable point to me, really, of what we've seen so far, because it really validates that traction piece, but it doesn't really give me that real core reason as to why we're really doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really important aspect. The tasks outcomes thing, I sort of go, well, it's a bit splitting hair. That feels a bit like flowery marketing language to me.
Sure.
It's splitting hairs of like, is it a task, is it an outcome? Well, it's a good question. Is palliative care a task or an outcome? It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Not to go too deep into healthcare there, but I think that third piece is where I'd really be bringing it up, and then secondly, like the other piece is like this sort of growing the clinics piece. I think there still is a lot to unpack there that doesn't really feel like it. Like I've sort of got bits of it of like, we've reduced operating costs and time saving, and people don't often buy stuff for time saving and that sort of stuff. But the increasing lifetime value and profitability, I'm like, okay, cool. Like,
right.
That's where I think it's sort of like it's starting to feel to me like that's the actual thing that we're really driving, and that's the sales messaging, and that's the actual point of this. And then I sort of want to go, okay, if that's the point, then how are you doing that?
Right.
Like, is that this integrated marketing thing, which I'm just assuming?
It almost feels like the reclaiming 10 hours per week, the operating cost reduction, that's basically the point of these types of platforms in the first place.
And you don't leave if you're happy with the existing one.
Yeah.
Like I think that's like if you're using a competitor, you're probably, I mean, maybe the founder will tell me otherwise, but maybe actually the workflow here saves them 10 hours a week on top of the competitor, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
But typically that's not the case. Sometimes it is just because you're getting a simpler product.
Sure.
Simpler product, easier time.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time it's sort of like, yes, by principle, these things save you a whole lot of time, which is why you buy them.
Exactly.
Like compared to a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Manual.
But that may also just be the piece of where, sometimes with these things, particularly if you're going up against a more complex later stage competitor, can be a situation where the customer finds that you save them a lot of time because they actually don't know how to use the competitor.
Yeah.
Because every software product has that inevitable sort of like drag up market into mid-market and enterprise. And with that comes a bigger surface area of features, like do they buy the bookings bundle? Do they not buy the bookings bundle? Do they know the bookings bundle even exists? All that kind of stuff. And so often you actually end up, and like I see this in my own software company sometimes, of where you'll see someone leave for a feature that you already have, and you're like, well, you could just have started using the feature or something.
Yeah.
But the nature of a complex product can be hard to find the feature.
Right.
And so you go to a simpler solution, which makes good sense to you, and it's easy to use, and now I can use online bookings, or patients can easily rebook. And it's like, well, maybe you actually just lost the check mark that's 16 pages deep that says allow rebooking in the existing solution. So that's where I sort of think there's something in here, but I'm kind of curious to unpack that a bit more.
Yeah, this is basically the whole thing that we've been seeing with like watching people adopt Notion into their workflow, because Notion is such an inherently flexible product. It becomes Lego that sometimes people just open up the empty database and they're like, where do I even go from there?
Yeah.
Right?
Or you have those people who it's sort of like they say to you a bit like Jira, like Notion's unusable. And it's like it's unusable because you've put so much stuff into it. There's all these bizarre workflows and like automations that run on the back of doing this and this and this. And then they go, oh, we've just gone back to Google Drive, and you're like, it's the worst product imaginable in this category. But also I can understand, like if you see this giant hulking thing that's like
simple, right?
Jira that's been really badly done, you go, oh, I really long something fresh and simple, and you go back to Trello from Jira. Okay, so number 9. Okay, so 300,000. So this is a tricky one. This is one of those slides where I go, logically this makes sense of saying there are lots of practitioners. Now, and the smaller clinics up to the bigger ones, sure, I agree with that. That's probably fair. And that's, again, the path people usually take. That's that same story if you start with a small business and people generally move up market. The school and clinic expansion piece is another one of those ones where I think it logically makes really good sense, but practically it rarely works out that way in this space. It's one of those things of where I think for the founder I'd be saying, like, have you actually seen that path work and how has that worked?
Yeah.
Because of just the way that, generally speaking, the career is structured in healthcare. Again, it's very different to like an engineering student where you learn to use MATLAB and then you buy MATLAB, or you're a 3D animator and you learn to use Premiere Pro and then you go and use Premiere Pro.
Right.
It's a different kind of journey of just like the way that it's sort of the career arc works. That just I've seen this on so many different slides, and it never actually works out. And so I'd sort of again, maybe that's actually because the market's changed. That would be an interesting point to make. But on sort of first look at it, I go yes, there are a lot of practitioners, but also it's a very slow-moving market. A lot of old practitioners.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are stuck in their ways. I've been with a cardiologist who used index cards, and that was in 2015, 16, well and truly after we should have had electronic records. But the sort of the university to graduate pathway is I think quite difficult without having a different wedge. And maybe the wedge is to say, actually, we're going to enable the way for them to be able to, work as a student under a practitioner, and we're going to allow the practitioner to bill the student's time or whatever. Then you can go, oh, okay, there's like a business model sort of difference here in how you're approaching it.
Yeah.
But at least the way that I kind of like see this piece, it's got a bit less of that element.
Yeah.
But that's been my view. I mean, student clinic piece, interesting, yeah, but I think it's again that depends on which exactly modality you're talking about, how that's structured, how the university is dealing with it.
Yeah.
You then have to often, if it's a university-run operation, you then have to sell into the university, which is an even worse journey. Try selling software into education.
I was just going to say.
There is a reason everyone hates edtech.
Yeah.
And you might just go, well, hey, we're going to do it by shadow IT, and that's also fine. But universities are also really awful to sell into. Probably worse than healthcare.
Yeah. I spent some time in intake sales.
Yeah.
Nightmare.
Yeah.
Nightmare to sell to.
Yeah.
It's just such a different.
And you think,
space
but
well.
if we just gave it away for free, they'd use it. No. Because then an IT project manager hears that you've used this software, and they go, oh, have you thought about integrating LDAP-based SSO into this solution? We need that to be able to do the blah, blah, blah. Oh, we need that to have SCORM compliance to be able to go into our e-learning system.
So much compliance.
Oh, it's just
so much compliance. And everything just becomes an organizational problem, and then there's like 100 people that need to sign off. And then, like, inevitably, a sales cycle just turns into, 4 years?
And maybe this is where an interesting piece for me would be, if we look at the other way to maybe structure this, and maybe to sort of disagree with the view that you and I are having here, right? Again, traction solves all problems.
Sure.
So we say we've got 400 odd practitioners at the moment. So at the bottom of this left-hand sort of column, you almost go, we currently have 400 practitioners. Middle one, you're like allied health schools. Okay, how many allied health schools are you currently operating in? So if the answer is 0, I'd go, oof. If the answer was, we're actually in 3 already, I'd go, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
that goes against my assumption here, as you have, of like education, nightmare, holy crap. And so, like, give me sort of the proof point of saying, this is why we think this is going to work. And, come back to the piece of where I sort of look at this initially and I'm like, this is going to work. Maybe the proof point is actually, no, we have shown that it does work. And that's why we're doing this as our go-to-market. Great. But then that's sort of that piece where I go,
Yeah.
The global expansion piece, interesting again, and everyone wants to say global expansion in this world. And it's kind of the tricky thing, I think, in healthcare, particularly of where it is a really unique to each geography and location industry. And so it can be quite hard. It can be quite hard to go to a global basis. And so then you sort of have to ask the question of, is Australia by itself a big enough market? Again, you look at like Hotdoc versus Health Engine in the healthcare space. And Hotdoc, for example, very, good exit, whatever it was, to private equity. That was still purely Australia. Different to Halaxy, which is, PMS essentially, that was sort of global day one. Like you can kind of choose your lane there, but you've got to sort of be able to ask and answer the question of, is this big enough within one geo, or is it truly always going to be multiple geos, in which case we need to be baking that in from day zero.
Yeah.
We can't sort of go, in the future, we'll go into the US. It sort of needs to be like our product decisions have to start on day zero, looking at this as a global product, not we'll bolt on other geographies later on. Or you end up rebuilding the same product again.
Yeah. Okay.
And then slide 10.
Last slide.
Okay, so we've got $1 million. It's not okay, sure. $1 million bucks, not a bad ask. It's got 100K of rev. This is probably what I call a traditional SaaS ask, right? Unfortunately, the SaaS apocalypse means that, if you think about it, what does he say? Something, Klaviyo, the e-commerce email company, is trading at like 2.9 times, their current run rate.
Oh my God.
And you think to yourself, oh, okay, this is a 100K run rate, and we're 300K, not suggesting that's the case, but...
Speaking of the SaaS apocalypse, we do have a SaaS apocalypse event coming up on June 10th. Make sure you sign up.
Good work.
You sign up to come around to the panel, all right? Thank you.
So I think that's one of the tricky things of this is that this so far, as a company, and again, as a VC, everyone's asking what's R as a fund. As a fund, what's our strategy and what's our portfolio aspect of AI? Because, AI, sexy. This is not really an AI story, right? Yeah. This is a traditional Australian-style B2B SaaS story, which I don't mind. That is what Australia's historically been very good at.
Great.
Right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, because of I guess the narrative arc, I guess, that's an uphill battle.
Yeah.
It's actually harder for me to write a plain SaaS check than it is for me to write a totally speculative AI check. Because I've got to justify it to my investors. And they'll go why is this, and that changes, there's a time where we thought cryptocurrency was a future. Thank God I didn't do a lot of those. Thank God I didn't do a lot of those deals. Although I may have made some excellent money for investors at the right time.
Sure.
But I think that's the part that's a sort of wider narrative piece. But $1 million of ask, not a illogical ask. Good to show that here's the outcome we're going to get to. 5 mil ARR, great. Yeah. I like a sort of here's our goal here. And I sort of like the element here of where you've sort of showed it is the part that's missing for me is the allocation piece. So, of our $1 million, what's our little pie chart? How much are you thinking as a founder is going into R&D versus marketing spend versus just general G&A, OpEx type stuff. That can be a helpful thing. Could be an appendix slide or whatever. I think in this context. But otherwise, good deck, interesting space. Again, I think the tricky part for me is I think you could have seen the same deck. Probably could have seen the same deck 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it would have probably looked the same.
Yeah.
Just not to say it's a bad thing, but you sort of go, there hasn't been at least from what I've seen and my interpretation here, there hasn't been a magical unlock in the last couple of years that's made this business possible in a way that wasn't in the past.
And is that always, I think I sort of know the answer, but is it always a timing question when it comes to pitch decks? Why now? Is that question
you've got to be aware of what that market piece is.
Sure.
And I think that's where the pitch to this might be to say, actually, it was non-economical to actually build software for the solo or the sub 5 practitioner, allied health practices.
Right.
You could say very upfront, being previously this was not economical. It wouldn't make sense to. Thanks to the fact of now we can build better software faster with AI, it's now possible. I go, oh, okay, right. Yeah. That gives me a reason for the why now and a bit of logic for the approach that we've taken here.
Sure.
But I think it's quite hard otherwise when you see some of this stuff and you go, yeah, I can see and I can understand you've seen the opportunity, and that's where when you see these things that are often recurring businesses and themes that you see pitched to you as a VC, it's because that opportunity piece is... obvious is probably too strong a word, but not non-obvious.
Yeah.
And what we have to think about as a VC is given our model is the sort of the J-curve, things that go crazy, go wild. What's sort of changed now that wasn't the case a while ago? And the fitness app is the classic one, where I think if you pitch me a fitness app now, I'd be you're absolutely crazy. But there probably is an interesting fitness app pitch somewhere. Please don't send me all the fitness apps pitches. But there probably is an interesting fitness app pitch somewhere of saying, I look at people some of my friends and things. They'll go to the gym and they'll just ChatGPT the whole program.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see that piece of where even the Whoop app, you can take a picture of your gym program and it inputs in all of the different exercises and you're oh, it's some fancy stuff here now.
Yeah.
Equally, at the same time, would I invest in another fitness app? No, probably not.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone hates fitness apps.
Yeah.
I've learned this. So it is I think a bit of like that why now piece does really come into question.
Cool. Let's go to some question and answer time. Let me go back to our...
Okay. Yes, you will be getting the recording, I believe.
Yes, you will be getting the recording. We upload all of our recordings on YouTube, so feel free to keep an eye out there.
Okay, there's a question about timing. At the bottom. Scroll. Which way do I scroll? There we go. Okay, so if timing is part of your pitch, doesn't that limit the length of your validity or moat? It does. It does lead to the length of your moat. That is what it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, So Anil, if you join the video call in, that would be great. If you hit the button, I think then that appears.
Yeah. Can you click dial in? Actually, I feel like for this purpose, we'll just keep your questions on the on text. So if you just want to, Anil, if you just want to type your questions, we have about 3 to 5 minutes for a few questions. So if you just want to type your questions there, I'll highlight them on the screen, and then we can take a look from there.
So in the timing piece, I think definitely, and like that is most businesses that the pointy end of the wedge is some kind of gold rush. Like something has happened, and suddenly people are excited, and that's why people buy now. It's right. Like I said, I will give the caveat here of saying you've seen the amount of information I have on her business, so no doubt a lot of it will have been wrong. But the point of this is to be able to show you what people think as they go through. I think you do have a limited timeline, and that's that's often why the why now question, as you said, is usually to say we're raising to take opportunity of this thing that we've seen. And usually that's not, you look at all the data centers, right? And that, historically you would say, well, there's been 1 million data center pitches over the last 10 years, but then now in the last 24 months, anyone will fund a data center.
Yeah, they sure will.
The timing piece can become important. Doesn't mean it was a bad deal 10 years ago. But it means that now it's an amazing deal.
Computer's the problem. We need more compute. We need infinite compute.
If only it was that simple. We all should. It's like the what is it? The one that Iron that pivoted from Bitcoin mining into anything else. Would I insert IP protection into this? Now, look, do I believe in patentable software? The answer to that is no. IP I think is important where there is deep protection, and that might be it's actually so we've done some deep tech deals. Might be it's like a unique material, unique process kind of thing. Software process, if you think about most software patents, they're mostly used defensively, somewhat exclusively. So yes, Meta and Samsung and all that stuff, all and Microsoft own a whole suite of software of patents in software, but that's usually only ever used other than outside of patent trolling, essentially. Usually they're only ever used so that essentially it's kind of like a way to avoid it so that Samsung doesn't sue Meta or vice versa by them both sort of having cheated. So hardware question, yeah, okay, in hardware maybe. Again, depends on whether there is actually any core IP in there. But sort of IP by itself for the sake of it and patents for itself is, if a company's dead, the patent's also worth nothing.
Rare, right.
Even a lot of the deep tech stuff, I did an investment in essentially a thing to help you work out whether the sunscreen you've applied is still valid, right?
Yeah.
And there's IP in that, so you're going to impregnate the thing, and there's a chemical and da-da, but the company didn't work, and the IP is worth nothing.
Okay.
So
let's move on to our second deck.
Quickly to answer the Anil question. Everything does say something different, and that's the joy of this space. Question. I can't follow what other VCs like at any point in time. That's where it's sort of I think you got to think about the purpose of this kind of thing. So the purpose of this is to be able to go, does this fit my mandate? So for example, if my mandate was deep tech, your business wouldn't suit me. Fair. Yeah. If my mandate was to say I've got all of this B2B SaaS in my portfolio and my investors are saying to me, too much B2B SaaS, I would go, great, okay, this is probably not going to be my next investment, even if it's a great one. Versus, if my job is B2B SaaS and I like this space, I like, this staging and thinking, if I write $20 million checks, you're the wrong size for me, right?
Yeah.
So the role of the deck, I think, should be short. Don't feel tempted to just dump tons and tons and tons of crap into it. There's nothing more scary as a VC when you open a deck and it's 50 pages long. Sure. I really hope the next one isn't 50 pages long. But you can put appendixes in there. I don't mind appendix slides, whether they go in a read deck or not. But really the role of that should be to be able to get me to the point of being able to go, is this interesting enough to have a call with you, to grill you on a lot of the questions I've just asked, like as I go through this. So you sort of do want to think about that piece.
Yeah, Neil says the product was meant to be a practice growth solution, which I think we sort of got.
Yeah, we kind of got there, and I think that's
the idea of it.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's like, I think one of the things that's really hard as a founder is like all of these sort of documents, same as when you're writing a thesis or whatever, right? Is like you get so lost in it yourself because you're trying all the time and you're looking at the same document. It can be hard to sort of step back and go, what's the message I'm trying to deliver here? And so I think if the practice growth piece is the key part, then like I think bring that element forward. This is where like bring that piece forward for me and saying like even some of those comps, right? Of saying like, hey, rather than the problem solution thing you've put there about like practice management as an industry, do the piece of, hey, in e-commerce, like we had MailChimp forever. And then we had Klaviyo. And Klaviyo was built from the ground up to help e-commerce brands make more money.
Right.
And it took the whole market by storm. And what we want to do is we want to do the same thing for healthcare. You're like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like you want to be the Klaviyo thing or the HubSpot or whatever for healthcare. Like,
would you say that's typically...
And the PMS part is the wedgie part of saying like, to do that, we've got to start by being integrated into the PMS. And it's actually easier to build a PMS now than it was to integrate into them, which is also probably true these days. So
would you say that's an effective way to communicate like your place in the market, by using like pre-existing understood stories, like we're trying to be the this of this.
It helps a lot, I think, when people can't quite grok what you are. Like if you remember, again, like and I've used the example a few times, I've met Andrew since, so it's, hello Andrew. But like remember spatiotemporal, we had a similar breakdown. It was sort of like, took for me to be like, okay, so what we're doing is we're tokenizing the probabilistic options of where an object will be next.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, cool. Like if you're saying to me what we do is we're a time series model of probabilities on space that we can then hand to an AI. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, the mathematician in my head understands that, which probably is not necessarily always understandable to everyone else. But like those kind of comparables, I think, often help to understand where this sort of fits. And I think particularly when you're looking at, what this is probably, you describe a legacy industry, healthcare, better or worse, sure. Is that like often saying in this other industry, this transformation's happened and it hasn't happened in this industry. Can be a really good sort of way to be able to sort of help someone grasp, this is actually a big opportunity.
Yeah. Cool. We're launching into our second deck.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Anil.
I've met Tom. Okay, excellent.
Yes. Oh, amazing. Great. Okay. I'll let you drive for this one.
Okay, you'll let me drive. Great. Yeah. It's a dangerous thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so pitch up. Now, see?
Technology.
Sorry, I didn't notice there's no little hand. I can mouse it, or I can click the big gibbers somewhere.
Oh, no, we can just go left to right.
Okay, arrows. Sweet. So, find book play. Building the sky scanner for sports. Oh, I don't know if that's really the right way to describe your business, Tom. And maybe it's changed. I probably met him about 6 months ago. So it could be he's pivoted, right?
Yeah.
I think, so my critique of this is it's not as clear as the previous one about what exactly you're building.
Sure.
Right? The Sky Scanner for Sports is like a nice marketing little like snippet.
Yeah.
But like doesn't really do the thing. And I think also missing a product screenshot. So,
and also just off the back of my loose understanding of Skyscanner, you just, you can see what flights are flying out and like what's cheap maybe. So I'm just like, okay.
See, look at that. If you've done this so many of these, you're becoming a VC. Yeah. So I wouldn't don't worry when you're presenting something at a conference or something. You sort of assume that the title slide sits there for like 10 minutes before you start talking.
Sure.
And in a read deck, it doesn't really. It's the first thing that you look at, right? So remember, you're allowed to put more words on a reading deck, and you're allowed to sort of like put a bit more context in because people are reading it.
Yeah.
So let's go. A whole lot of sports things. Here we go. I'll just shut this out of the way. There we go. A whole lot of sports venues sit empty while music. So this is our problem slide. So this is an interesting question, and I think you and I have talked about this, and I've thought about this since I met Tom. So I do have some context for this. Haven't seen his deck before though, I don't think. And it's a good question, and I think what I agree with this, but then I think the challenge is where do these sports venues sit? A lot of them are in schools, and that's when then I go, okay. So then the complicated thing is going to be access. right? Because the last thing schools want is random people wandering around campus.
Yeah.
Different to council, everything else, which are obviously, like they're in the park or whatever. But like, that's kind of the immediate thing of where we go, okay, so like what of those sports venues that are sitting empty, like how are we going to access those ones? So let's find out. So this is where it's like, I just put this first sentence on the first slide. Find, book and pay for any sports venue in New. Simple, right?
Yeah.
Like Skyscanner to me doesn't say that. I can kind of see the comparison piece, like that part, that bit of logic makes sense.
Sure.
But it's almost like you're almost more Airbnb than you are Skyscanner.
Yeah.
In a sense,
Yeah.
I'd almost say.
Maybe that's the new tagline.
Maybe it's Airbnb.
Maybe, yeah.
Well, Airbnb's stock price hasn't been great.
Sure.
But anyway, putting that aside. So like I think this is this is a good example of a nice simple solution slide for what's a marketplace, right? It shows there's two sides of the markets. Obviously, there's people who have venues, people are looking for venues. They can filter it. They've got availability. They can book it. Great, So that I think is a nice simple piece. And the third one I think is an interesting question, which I hadn't seen this part of his pitch. I hadn't heard this part of his pitch. Of saying there's also a data piece here, which is interesting. It's one to explore more later. Okay, traction slide. Okay, we're going quickly into traction here. So now 21K in ARR SaaS. Now I'm going to assume. Now see, I like this. I like this already. Well done, Tom. You'll see that there's a difference between GMV and ARR. And all VCs, if they see only one of these two numbers, they're going to be very suspicious as to what the other is. Okay. So GMV is gross marketplace volume. So in other words, the amount of money that's flowed through. And some people class that as ARR.
Right.
So some would say, oh, look, we've done 120K in GMV. It's like, okay, that's not really A, recurring, B, like that's just sort of, it might even be a run rate, but sort of like, I guess the difference in, you look at, Ticketek, I'm sure, sells trillions of dollars of tickets, but probably only has billions of dollars of revenue.
Yeah.
And so the difference can be substantial, but yes, the trillions does make it defensible. So good that you split that out. So that part I think is interesting. 21K, I'm like, it's light. What does that represent? So I'm curious as to what that means in terms of like a sort of CL, like a sort of per customer, an ARPU. The rebooking thing, okay, that sort of is giving me the other side of the marketplace. LTV CAC 6-week payback, I go, okay, like still pretty early. So that's useful. It's good to see that you're tracking that. But that one's
what does
probably
CAC mean?
Customer acquisition cost.
Okay.
So I'm assuming here that our acquisition cost is going to be a person, banging the doors down. But LTV is good. But again, I'd be worried if LTV was bad at this stage. It should be the kind of thing of where there's a decent portion of the market that has enough of a sort of like hair on fire problem that the early customers should be easy to acquire. If the early customers are hard to acquire, more difficult problem. So let's have a look at the validation piece. Okay, supported by industry, nah, I don't really care. Distribution partner, nah. LOIs, like nice, but not important. The fourth one is a bit more interesting in saying like, hey, like we've got some strategics that are actually committed.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool. Like that gives you a bit of the fundraising journey, bit of the validation of like you're connected, everything else. The pipeline piece I like as well of showing that. So I would actually probably like rip out all that stuff on the left, and I would actually show at the bottom here like that sales pipeline piece. So saying here's who we have, current customer. Here's who's kind of in the pipeline. Here's who's still in the sort of like maybe future bucket.
Yeah.
Give us a bit of that sort of pipeline metric piece to be able to show like how much of this you've really got and where that's building. I think that'll be a much more useful sort of use of that space than the kind of nice, oh yes, Vic Health likes us. Yeah, of course Vic Health likes you because you're going to get more people playing sport. That's the point of Vic Health. So sweet. So team slide. Michael, soccer program, cool. Tom, venture-backed marketplace, sweet, and Laura, CTO. So sort of like the two co-founders and then CTO. So this is where the Skycam might be coming from because the person's
That's it.
And an aggregation analogy, maybe an interesting question to ask. So my challenge here in this slide would be immediately to say you said CTO here, and then at the bottom it says advisor and board member. So is that how is Laura involved? And everyone gets a bit spidey, like everyone's always a bit suspicious when you see, the sort of the no technical co-founder, which I think is probably they're maybe trying to, like carefully narrow that, walk that very narrow line.
Sure.
But that admittedly gives me the heebie-jeebies. So like I would sort of either put that as either advisory CTO, or I'd work out how to get rid of that last sentence somewhere, or like be clear that that's not related to you if she's not an advisory CTO. Because that's what it sort of says to me immediately. Is like you kind of tried to bury the sort of the subtle, she's not actually here full time.
Yeah.
But equally at the same time, there's probably an interesting question to ask of, does a business like this that's ultimately the value of the business is the marketplace aspect, right? Sure. Does the business need a hugely strong technical team with a PhD co-founder? No, probably not. It's a marketplace business. And I would say the same as do you need would you need a CTO in an e-commerce business these days? No, of course not. You want someone who's vaguely technical, who can write the theme, but that kind of semi-outsourced model makes sense in e-commerce now, in a way that it probably didn't 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Yeah. So you've got to try and sort of work out that piece of, are you trying to build a pure marketplace? You're trying to build a tech company, and they're different journeys. If you're trying to build a tech company, you're going to need someone technical in-house. If you're trying to build a marketplace, you're going to need someone technical nearby, at least part-time, but you may not actually need someone full-time, particularly in the days of Claude and Codex and everything. Okay, so now this is the why now, right? So here we go. Here's the why now. Government investing heavily. Yeah, government's been investing heavily for a long time in this space. I don't know, maybe a little bit. Again, interesting, but participation piece. Yeah.
Yeah, sport's always been a big priority.
Yeah, Australia's this is kind of like saying Australia likes sports. Brisbane 2032. Like Sydney Olympics. I was in Sydney for the Sydney Olympics. So when I was a child, it shows my age. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this is sort of this slide to me is like a nice to have, but it doesn't really tell me anything that I didn't already sort of know. Government likes this space, cool. People like sport in Australia, cool. We do more major events, and when major events happen, people get interested in the major events, cool. We're seeing the same thing with Formula One, right? But I don't know if necessarily maybe to use the Formula One analogy, Melbourne's had the Formula One forever. And the attendance, even the tennis, the tennis has gone up massively, the Formula One, as a result of Drive to Survive. The tennis has gone up massively as a result of the tennis, as a result of the sort of infrastructure, the investment in the non-tennis aspect of tennis.
Yeah.
Right? And I think they're two very different paths, but there's that sort of different kind of catalyst there. One was actually a government intentional investment by Tennis Australia and everything to be able to actually make the Australian Open more of a thing that was friendly to non-tennis people. And Formula One was Drive to Survive. Entirely unrelated to probably Melbourne, Formula One, whatever. But that, I'm sure, was a massive driver for the big increase in actual attendance.
Yeah.
So I sort of, doesn't really add a lot to me. Okay, so this is a good one. Okay, increase in revenue high. So I'm curious about this one. So I go, okay, cool. How important is this revenue for them? And maybe the answer is very meaningful, very not meaningful. So I think the part for me here is I'm sort of if you look at, it's a nice worked summary. I really like this, a simple piece of, hey, this is how sort of the dollars work out for our customers. And you take 10% commission, sweet. And so if the customer's getting 11.5K, what does it actually mean to them? Is that, you can say, oh yeah, this is free money. Okay, sure. But they've also still got to pay for groundskeeping. There's some sort of indirect costs that's got to go on there. And some of this, yes, they've got to, if there's more people playing on your grass, then you've got to feed it more water or whatever, I'm sure. I'm not a groundskeeper, so...
No, I don't either.
Don't trust me to do that?
Yeah.
But I think, the interesting part here is, for them, what does that extra 11K mean? Is that, suddenly we can do something that we couldn't do? We're replacing all of our soccer gear annually rather than every 3 years.
Yeah.
Or is that, 11K out of a typical sports budget of what they already had of 5 million, probably not for Rowville Secondary College, I assume.
Sure.
Maybe for Scotch College or something.
Yeah.
But is that a drip in the bucket of extra money, or is that actually useful extra money to them? So there's sort of is that interesting question, I think, of what I'd sort of try and do. But interesting in the an increase. So the other part that this says to me is whether, and the other part I'm curious about here is whether they were booking before or not.
Right.
So is this a net new revenue stream, or is this they were offering this in the past, but it was sort of ad hoc, $1,000 a year.
So it'd be interesting to see what was it beforehand and what is it now.
It might be zero. It might have gone from 0 to 11K.
And that would be so much more impactful.
Well, but also 1 to 11K can also be paid. Because if you already have 1K of revenue, then you go, okay, well, these customers obviously have a process already to let people have access. Again, the access thing is what I always freak out about with schools. Parents freak out.
Of course.
And so if they already have some money and you're 11xing the money, it's kind of an easier sale. To say, oh, we 11x the revenue. versus you've got a dead asset. If it's a school that needs money, that's where I go back to the thing of, is this meaningful money, right? Because Scotch probably doesn't care if their sport thing, makes them 1K or 10K.
Yeah.
But other schools that may be a meaningful amount of dollars. Just to kind of run this impact of things. Probably click through for the school testimonial to be able to find out more. I need to flip through. So 2 revenue streams. Yeah, we've kind of got this already. So we've got the a SaaS thing and we've got the booking commission. So that's interesting. The sort of see the future expansion piece. I'd almost make the future expansion piece a little bit more obvious. We could have already covered those bits earlier, but that's maybe because I've sort of read through it as we've gone. But I like the fact that you're clear in saying you've got a subscription piece. I think if you do these marketplaces run purely on commission, very, very hard. Very hard to build.
Yeah.
You can have a much higher take rate. You can obviously then take 20%, 25% or something. But it's often much harder to be able to do it, even if it's an easier sell without having to actually have a base thing.
Not consistent.
So, okay. So we're selling the aggregation piece. Hey, we don't have to go through it. That's interesting. I think this probably doesn't really cover. This to me probably doesn't say as much. I like a 2x2 with some logos and things that I can Google. So it doesn't say as much as I would love to be able to really understand what the alternatives are and where you do it. This part down the bottom is saying your first combine SaaS aggregation and the actual booking side it's a more interesting piece, or the national piece. That is maybe a little bit more interesting. But this doesn't really, again, doesn't get me too excited. So we're going schools first. So we're coming back to the piece of who's the first customer. So there you go. We'll find this later on.
Yeah.
So schools first. Okay, cool. And then we're going to go to the private sector, councils, and then national digital. Sure, that makes sense. This is kind of the roadmap piece. But does this make sense? The C to A to B, C? Well, I don't know. I feel like you should be able to get to council at this point. If you've got this much in schools, councils surely aren't that bad. Maybe we'll find out that they are.
Yeah.
So ask slide. Love an ask slide. Here we go. So raising 550. So very reasonable ask. We've got 21K in net to you, Rev, to reach 200 schools. How many schools do we have now? I can't remember if we actually talked about this in the past.
It was 20, perhaps? Wait, 200? No.
Yeah, see? We didn't see that. We don't. The math. You follow the math. So 200 schools from where? I'm getting, looking at this math, it's somewhere between 0 and 50,000 in ARR growth. So give us, if that's 20, then that's going to be, so that, looking at, trying to do the math in my head here, that's going to be saying you're going to roughly double the schools, but maybe, I reckon that's probably actually wrong. I'm guessing they might have 50 schools. I don't know. Let's find out. I'm sure Tom can tell us. So raising 550, so show us where you're going from, really. I know the graph kind of shows that, but not really. 2.6 million ARR, like that piece of where we're getting to.
Yeah.
And Series A late 2027. So that means you're raising for a bit over 18 months. So yeah, that's not bad. Use of funds, this is the pie chart. I'd put it in a pie chart. I wouldn't necessarily do it in it's maybe more visually nicer here. But, put it in a pie chart. And split out that tech marketing sales piece. So, it's nice to have people as a wedge of the pie, but it's actually more useful to have R&D, which is kind of tech, essentially, versus marketing and sales, which you can bucket in advertising into that, or you can bucket advertising separately.
Yeah.
But that's where I sort of go, you've got marketing and sales in your use of funds, but then go to market, which presumably is advertising spend.
Yeah.
But as a marketplace, the other part for me is I go, that's your go-to-market, but where are you allocating that across your two different markets? So, it's good to have a sort of team slice of this is our expected team structure in terms of number of salespeople versus number of everything else and cost. But in a marketplace, I also want to understand which is the easy side and which is the hard side of the market. And if you talk to the early stage of people at Uber and Airbnb and all that kind of stuff, they'll all tell you the way in which for pretty much every marketplace, you want an easy side and a hard side. And if both sides are hard, you're playing on hard mode. And so in that go-to-market, it's sort of okay, is the easy side the school or is the easy side the booker? And so how does that, and that usually is reflected in how much money you're spending on each, right? So I presume you're probably spending more at this point on the supply side than the demand side, which is the school side. But I don't know. So I think you can make that a little bit more clear. Down the bottom, it shows safe, 200K already committed. So the 200K we mentioned earlier in the deck, we're sort of including in this 550 round. So we're looking at sort of a net of 350, which is great. Nice, simple, easy. And yeah, kind of makes sense. Again, you don't need to have this in the slide, but like I'd immediately be asking the founder, okay, of the 200 that's already committed, like what are the terms of those safes? Because with safes, you don't have 16 different sets of terms, be a nightmare. So I've then got to know that if I'm going to be investing, am I coming in on the same set of terms, or am I going to have this weird unstitching of what's already being done problem? And that's it. So I won't go through, I presume here are appendixes. So as we sort of discussed earlier, you can put lots of appendixes in if you want. You can see some of these things. Some of my answers, I may be able to, digging through these things. So for example, who are we going to hire? Good things to include.
Right.
So, good example of probably a set of appendix slides that answer some of the questions that I was asking about to be able to work out. There you go. So they did have community hire already.
Ah, right, right.
So there you go. And they've got ice baths and all that stuff. There you go. So I think that's probably a good example of where the appendix slides can add good colour to it. Because certainly after I got to the end here, I sort of, thank God it wasn't all 22 slides, or I would have been in trouble with the time.
Yeah.
But
I was doing the same thing.
But putting that aside, nice work, Tom. Thank you. You really kicked that goal that I'd already set up for you, to use the analogy. Terrible joke.
Yeah.
But a good example of where the appendix can then help to answer some of that.
Yeah.
And the deal room could be the same thing. You might just have a link to a deal room, or you might just have a link to the appendixes rather than necessarily them in the actual deck you email.
Yeah.
But those things sometimes give you that extra little bit of colour that might have been helpful.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Let's take a look at the questions. Do we have Tom in the chat with us today? I mean, I let Tom know about the that we were taking a look at his deck, but I'm not quite sure if he might be with us in the chat today.
I'll grab one question while you have a look. Do VCs Tom is here.
Tom's
Hello.
here.
Do VCs like solo founder or multiple founders? VCs like multiple founders. Solo founder,
sure
red
do.
flag.
They
I say
sure
this
do.
as a solo founder.
Yeah.
Solo founder is doing business hard. So and good question from Julia of should you be putting the themes together and how much should you be signposting things like this is the problem slide, this is the solution slide. I'm interpreting that as I go through, right? So I'm interpreting what each of those slides is meant to mean. I'd call it a stylistic question, really. Nice to have sometimes if it's not obvious, but usually I find problem solution things like that is kind of, you can work it out. Where did we go from?
Maybe just...
There's a good question from Laura from earlier about how you sequence things. Do you do product or traction or vision first? That is a really good question. Point of religion, as I would call it. And I think there's not a right or wrong answer. You've seen these ones, both of these two slides kind of did intro, problem, solution. Sometimes you do intro vision, intro solution, intro, the different structure. I think it's really about that piece of what's the story you want to tell? Because I think if the story is about the really big vision and everything else, and it is, as you suggest, deep tech manufacturing kind of longer term piece, that can be really important. But that might actually instead be the way that you structure the problem.
Yeah.
The problem may be structured in that way of saying, for example, magnetics in our portfolio, early pitch deck, so it does electric engines was initially, but early on it was about aircraft, right? And it was about the piece of, great, aircraft, weight, important. We save 30% of weight in engines in the stator motor.
Yeah, wow.
And you're okay, sweet. I can see the piece of energy cost go up, electric aircraft, important, saving weight, important in aircraft. Turns out they're now doing more things in automotive and other sort of spaces as well. But for them, that was where the vision piece is the piece of, yes, they want to be in everything. They want to be in all the electric engines and blah, 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 everything else. But the vision piece was saying the element of hey, if we just crack this one small part of the market, we'll do really well, which is the small part of the market. So I think it doesn't really necessarily matter. It just depends on how that really works with the narrative.
We'll take some other questions.
Where is AI in all of this? Great question. Where is the AI in Tom's deck? That's a good question. You mentioned AI late in the piece, Tom, but you didn't actually put it earlier. So I think that is a good, it's a delicate balance because I think it's tempting as a founder when you've already got an existing business to just sort of stick the AI, the paint on it. Yeah. It's sometimes you see the same founder and the same idea and it's 3 years ago you pitched me this with blockchain. Now you're pitching me with AI. Oh my God, still the same idea. Still the same team. So I think be clear if it's a key part of it. But if it's not a key part of it, like I imagine for Tom, for example, it's more the piece of I can search with natural language. And like, that's nice. But I can search Airbnb with natural language, but I still use the drop downs of like these dates and like I need 4 rooms and 3 bathrooms and all that sort of stuff. I still use the drop downs. So like the AI story is not core, I guess, to the Airbnb experience for a user. Versus, an interesting piece for me was, again, from one of the calls I had earlier in the week of like this property management, I'll broadly call it property management, so I don't overly identify it, property management solution. I sort of said to them like, that question of like, what's this unlocked? Like I've seen this pitch a million times, what's changed? Of course. And they're like, well, the thing that's really changed is in the past to set this up, you'd need to go through 50 million forms. I need to set it up for you, blah, blah, the settings, the configuration, the inputs. And now we can just get you to just dump all these files into a Google Drive folder and AI goes and does all the settings for you. And I'm like, okay. So the unlock here is AI enables the onboarding. And I'm like, that's actually a really interesting insight that I hadn't really thought about. So sometimes that can be a very small thing. Other times it can be a core part. So to answer C's question, under what conditions would VC provide funding for startup pre-revenue? We do provide funding startup pre-revenues. Actually, VCs do write a lot of pre-revenue checks. We don't. It changes a lot depending on what the business is, and a lot of that sometimes is like I think the bar that's really shifted here is in the days of AI, you're no longer typically, not always. You're no longer typically the barrier of saying we've got to put our heads down and build something for 6 months to be able to sell anything is now not really a thing anymore. Yeah. It's now kind of easy to get to that version 0, version 1 MVP if it's a software thing. Yeah. But for instance, like, that deep tech company that's doing the electric aircraft, we invested pre-revenue. Like it's, of course, like, a med tech or biotech company, you're investing pre-revenue because like you don't have a choice. So you definitely do have those things. You definitely do see those things, and that's absolutely I think using AI to auto list sports. So the AI story is the capturing of the things. Yeah.
So helpful to put in earlier, or
maybe add a sentence to that, Tom.
Yeah.
But on the pre-revenue side, like I think the difference is that as a VC you see the founders that have revenue for having even X dollars or nothing $0. And it can be a negative signal when people are saying we need money for revenue, and you're like, but I've seen a whole lot of companies in this space that have revenue without money.
So true.
Some companies require it, and I remember at one point talking to the founder of a big like SAP style accounting solution, right? And she said, our first raise we had to raise for 3 years to build out what we knew the product needed to be.
Wow.
And you're like, you know what? And this was probably like 2017, so before AI, pre-AI. These days it's 6 months, right? Claude, don't tell me it takes 3 years. You're doing this today.
Yeah.
But
hurry up! It'll take me too long.
But certainly, like for that, it was like, you go to build a whole like accounting thing. You're going to run an entire business on. Probably does take 3 years.
Yeah.
So Nicola, as a founder, at what point in the conversation with the VC is probably to ask what they are offering and asking of? Ooh, in what sense do you mean? Do you mean in the sense of like what like ownership we want? Is that the? Do you want to clarify the question there, Nicola?
I guess typically in a lot of the VC decks, I mean the.
Yes. Okay. So like what? Yeah. So look, the terms of investment are kind of this delicate balance of where, generally speaking, the terms are set by whoever is leading the round. That gets weird in situations like Tom's, where there's already people that are in the round, but they're a minority of the current round. Yeah. And that's where it gets a bit like weird and confusing. Generally speaking, most VCs...
Throwback to our last session with Claire Thompson about the legalities behind raising. You can check that out on our YouTube channel. There's some great tidbits about how... Let me try to...
People get into some pretty weird structures accidentally.
Yeah, like... She was always stressing about the importance of setting the groundwork early on. So just to make sure you're not increasing and giving everyone way more stuff than you can, way more stuff than you can deliver on. But basically.
So, and this is what we say to a lot of founders who are still the early part of their race, is like the benefit of a safe, as Tom is doing, is that you get the money in as you go. Great. Downside of it is, if you get the money in as you go and the early money has different terms to the late money, it gets really confusing. Because the late money often might want to undo some of the terms the early money's already signed. And that can be a bit complicated. So you can definitely, I mean, my view as a VC is ask me the question. Like, I don't care. My job is to answer questions. But like, I think don't be afraid of asking those questions. A lot of the time you won't know. You know, like I won't necessarily know until really I've shaped it up. Like generally speaking, most rounds dilute a founder between 15% plus or minus 5. Top mark 20, 25, occasion very rarely 30, but generally not over 30. More than 30% dilution, you get really worried. 5% dilution, pretty rare in the current market. If you're a, Google engineer dropping out of Google to build an AI company, you might be able to get 5% squared away.
Yeah.
But typically speaking, most founders, it still is sort of in that 10 to 25% range, probably averaging on 15 to 20-ish at the moment.
Yeah, it's so funny actually. When you were talking about sort of like where's the AI label and everything, there's been this thing I've been scrolling way too much Startup LinkedIn, but there's been this famous story on Startup LinkedIn recently. It's just like this guy basically wrote a fake resume that he was a Stanford computer science student, vague AI startup, sent it to 30 VCs, 7 of them wanted to meet with him, 4 of them wanted a call immediately. And it's just so funny because he didn't even have a pitch deck. There was no pitch deck.
That's what you remember that like VC is a marketplace too. What do our investors want? Our investors want more AI.
Yeah.
So like when we see something as AI, really easy to write a check.
Stanford CS, wow.
Great question from C. Does startups with ESIC classification make a difference for VC funding? For us as a VC, no.
Can you just clarify for the audience? And myself.
Yeah, sorry, ESIC.
What's ESIC?
It's the early stage innovation criteria. I can't remember what the C stands for.
Okay.
It's a thing that justifies, it essentially says that you get a capital gains reduction, and we'll see if it still stays the case. Let's not get into that one.
Sure.
But essentially it means that you get a capital gains reduction and a tax offset as an investor. As a VC fund, we have we actually have an entirely different regulatory regime. So we have limits on what we can invest in, but also that means that the things that we can invest in get that treatment anyway, which is a bit broader than an ESIC test. But early stage innovation could be capital. Anyway, I don't know what the C is. So that part doesn't matter to us. But angels, for example, that may be important. However, at the same time, whether you're investing in a VC fund like us or in a startup, I would say if you're doing it for the tax reasons, then you're probably investing in the wrong asset class. So it's CGT free, and you also get a tax offset in the year that you put the money in. FYI, same thing with VC funds.
I mean, it's a wild.
It's a great question. Would we be interested in an AI product supporting people going through breakups or grief? Now, it's funny because one of the things that I think Australians don't really know on the whole, and this came up at our last investor summit. Is that Australia actually has 2 of the world's largest companion app companies.
Which ones?
I can't remember what they're called. One starts with an R. But 2 of the world's biggest like AI girlfriend / boyfriend apps are actually based in Australia.
Crazy.
Yeah. And like, they're the kind of companies that you probably couldn't... Like, we had some pretty funny conversations around the table at a group of VCs the other day of whether it was sufficiently in mandate for us to be able to invest in them. Like it's not quite investing in gambling, right?
Yeah.
But you're like, full well that a lot of these...
It's on the edge.
Yeah.
It's on the edge.
Yeah. And trust and safety is still very important.
Well, it's funny you actually bring up gambling because, I mean, I'm not sure if everyone knows, but Australians gamble more per capita than any other country on Earth.
And I mean, even Adrian Portelli's thing, that LMCT, weird, stock take giveaway thing, right? We were actually pitched that.
Adrian Portelli, yeah.
I remember being pitched that. I remember actually having this would have been like, what, 2018, 19?
Yeah.
I remember being pitched it and having the whole conversation being like, does this actually meet the criteria of gaming that then means we wouldn't be able to invest? And it actually probably would have been a great investment, like ethically, looking into that, but like cash-wise, probably would have actually been a great investment.
But does it? Is it technically gaming?
That's the thing. I believe, the ATO make a different different view of this, but I believe that the regulators that he's kind of just been able to a bit like a lot of the online casino stuff. Where it's it's just like Kalshi and Polymarket, like in there.
Yeah.
And if it does, then arguably...
Also, then you throw some crypto in there. And it's like, is it money? It's not real money.
But then irrespective of that reality, it may also come down to the piece of where my investors might go, oh, we hate gambling.
Yeah, that's true. So true. Yep. All right. We're a little bit over time, but it's okay. We'll finally a few more comments.
An ESIC funding by the ATO, I couldn't really give a crap about it. It may become important soon. I think should the government restrict the capital gains concessions purely to ESIC eligible companies, and then otherwise they're treated generally as they're proposing. My thesis on that is that a private ruling is going to go up massively, but I think the effort of going through a private ruling is a waste of time for most companies because they're usually pretty obviously either in or out. But that's, again, a point of religion. Does it matter to me as a fund, though? No. As an angel, maybe. Some angels care about that. Some angels just claim it anyway.
Yeah, so true.
That is the joy of tax.
I also wanted to ask before. So, obviously, right, just to wrap up the whole, VCs all have a different opinion. Obviously, sometimes founders are stuck in a really difficult position because they're like, one VC is telling me this, one VC is telling me this, what do I do, right? Is it actually a kind of shades of like job application, like you do your research based on the VC and tailor your pitch deck to that, or...
I think it's
is that just diminishing return?
Yeah, I personally think it's diminishing return to do that. Yeah. I think what can help and what I think is important is to at least look at the portfolio page of the VC to understand what they've invested in. Yeah. Right? And like if they've invested in nothing that looks even slightly like you ever,
it's probably not likely.
But if, sometimes they'll give you a bit of flavour of saying, and it might be a situation of where you can actually see that they've invested in something that is tangentially similar to you, like another marketplace in a different area, and you can say, hey, like on the call, you'd be like, hey, like, what's your experience been like with company X? We think we're doing what they've done for blah with blah. That can actually be a really helpful thing to do and know. But otherwise, I think like tailoring to each VC, like we change our minds every week.
Yeah.
Like I talk to the rest of the sector all the time, and I still can't work out which companies to send to my other colleagues. And that's my job. I think it's an impossible one for a founder to really understand.
So true.
Because there is just so many moving pieces.
And sometimes it's a preference thing, right?
Like, and it is, yeah. And
I don't like pie charts. I like bar charts.
Yeah. And I mean, even for us internally, when we're talking about companies of our portfolio doing follow-on rounds, we'll, often the partners at the fund, James and Julie and I, we'll debate which partner at Airtree should see this deal. Which one should we send this to? Who do you reckon is going to be most interested or least interested or blah, blah, blah? And we'll each have a different view.
Yeah.
So, even within our own partnership, we have different views on what people find interesting. So I think it's impossible for a founder to really understand that. So,
yeah. With that, I think it's a good time to close out our session. Thank you very much for joining us today. We had over 67 people live, and most of you guys stayed for the entire session, which is really, really cool to see that the community's been staying longer and longer for our workshops and our lunch and learns. Just letting you know, I did post our YouTube channel in the comments. I can post it again. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to see all of our lunch and learns in full. We record all of them and upload them there at 4K with timestamps for your viewing pleasure. Starting to do more reels as well.
With timestamps.
So pay attention to that. If you are in Melbourne, we do have an event coming up on June 10th about the SaaSpocalypse. We've got a great panel talking about what that actually means. Is it actually dead to build SaaS? Should you just be building an AI company and say you're building an AI company and claim that you went to Stanford to study computer science? I'm joking. No, I'm joking.
Fraud works for some. Works until it doesn't. You got it's the Elon Musk, Elizabeth Holmes continuum. For some people it works.
My hot take is that,
I think they're the same person. It's just that one kind of like could keep it alive long enough and the other could not.
Yeah, so true. You hear about, how Thomas Edison took that huge contract for building light bulbs? I'm like, did Elizabeth Holmes do the same thing?
Correct.
She did the same thing, but she didn't pay off.
But it's a delicate thing. I call it like the founder distortion matrix of a lot of those really good founders have that, and whether they're like it ends up being a huge fraud or not. Like, you can see when people pile into these things because they look the same from the outside.
Right. Yeah.
Afterwards, you can say, oh, yeah, that was obviously a fraud.
Sure.
But at the time, you go, oh, like, they did kind of look the same.
Yeah.
Like,
And she pulls that off and uses that raising money.
if you think about the first piece of when Elon Musk decided he'd go and start a rocket company, Come on. Like, the guy had no idea.
The
Right?
shades are crazy,
Like, you can't imagine. You can imagine how crazy you'd be. Like, you build electric cars, my friend. That's pretty cool. But like the rockets are different science.
Yeah.
And I'm not an Elon fanboy at all. But I'm like, that's no different to Elizabeth Holmes saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this whole thing with a drop of blood." You know, and you're like, okay, cool, sweet.
Yeah. Big gambles. Anyway, come to our events. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be on. We're taking a break next week, but we will be back on the same day. We have SaaSpocalypse, June 10th. We have a great workshop on product design. Take a look at our Luma calendar. Thank you very much, Hugh.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. See ya.